So we're kicking off our afternoon with a very special session, question and answers with Mrs. Smriti Irani. Mrs. Irani has been a trailblazer in politics, media, public services, and is now bringing the Berkeley Skydeck to India to strengthen ties between Indian entrepreneurs and Silicon Valley's innovation ecosystem. When Suhani met Mrs. Irani in Davos for the World Economic Forum earlier this year and told her about this summit, Mrs. Irani immediately agreed to participate. She saw how important this conversation is and aligned with it right away. We're so honored she's here with us today. So please join us in welcoming Mrs. Smriti Irani and our moderator, Dr. Suhani Jalota.
I mean, it'll be mainly you talking, so. Okay. Hi, everyone. Well, we are here to talk about Mrs. Irani and her journey. And actually, this is a very interactive session. She actually requested that she wants mostly audience members and the attendees here at the summit, thank you, to actually ask her questions. So she's very happy to respond about any issues around future of work, her work in health, women's health, and women's empowerment overall. But we are so honored to have you here with us today. It really means a lot. I know we met a few months ago, and then since then, you've really shown so much commitment, honestly, also to this. And I've been just so surprised by the level of warmth. And
you're surprised?
No, sorry.
Because politicians have commitment. Oh, no, but it is surprising, I'm sure, that politicians who are continuously, incessantly committed must be a...
I think we are able to get real answers from you, and we're able to get you to actually come to sessions that are meaningful for women around conversations on academia and actually engaging in cross-sector work, which is very, very unique. So thank you for that. And we are all inspired by the work that you do. We want to showcase some of that here today for some of the people who may be even less familiar from those that are, in academia and other spaces. So just speaking to that, to get started first, Mrs. Irani actually has been on a tour of multiple education institutions. So I was told at first she was coming to Stanford, then other universities got added on, and there was Harvard and Berkeley and Kellogg and ASU and many universities in the mix. And so we'd love to learn from you maybe a little bit about your journey across these universities. What have you learned? Any surprises? Anything that you'd like to share to get started?
Honest answers? Okay, so at Howard, my response was, if you want to disagree with me, then read up. I predominantly, in my engagements at Howard, not only spoke about the role of and how women in politics are perceived. I believe many people presume that there is a problem about being a woman in politics, but the honest to God truth is there's a problem of being in power. So perceptionally, you have to recognize that being in politics and being in power are two different attitudes, opportunities, circumstances altogether. I am very pleased to see at the front row here Pragya Khanna, who's again a partner in crime at the World Economic Forum. I work with one of her colleagues in the B20 South Africa team for digital transformation. And one of the issues that we are taking to ground in India is across 300 cities, 100,000 women who own businesses, how to help them understand certification, compliance needs for the global supply chain, how to introduce them to generative AI, how to teach them macro accounting, how to leverage AI or technology, even on devices which may not be as smart as Apple, but how to ensure that high consequences with low tech is a possibility. I also believe that many women who are in business presume that that one product, that one service is the life of their business opportunity, which is not the same for men. So I'm hoping to explain to women that failure is a part of doing business. So how to go from, let's say, one product to another. Services do reach a saturation point. So how to go from one service to another. If they so desire, how to deepen their engagements in local markets. If they so desire, how to reach out to diverse regions in terms of markets. But also we have partners, let's say in an organization like Kearney, which says we will teach them how to engage with global suppliers and be a part of, conform to global standards so that they can be an equal partner in growth. Apart from that, we in the Alliance have an MOU with the Commonwealth Secretariat. So what we will do in India across 300 cities is also going to become a template for 56 countries across the world. Wow. So that's just me in the personal capacity. Insofar as, of course, the work not only within India, but my experiences at Howard, at the Howard Kennedy School, there's a very, very well-meaning academic leader, Hannah Bowles, and we were in conversation as to how to teach negotiation skills to these women, especially if they want to negotiate on international contracts, or even negotiation skills within family structures now that they'll be part of global supply chains, or at least will articulate a global ambition. So given that our movement will not be in the so-called very celebrated urban centers like Delhi, Bombay, Bangalore, Kolkata, Chennai, we are going to the smallest of cities and towns in India. I think it'll give Hannah a great perspective as to how women in business relate to her negotiating skills at the Kennedy School on the grassroots in India. So it'll be a good mix to see. At Berkeley, I had the privilege of having an executive education program at Berkeley FinTech. And when I was minister, I believed that I wanted to learn things which had nothing to do with me, my policy, my ministry. So I did have an opportunity to see my old colleagues at the Harvard Extension School, because I've under the executive program there, I've learned a little bit about environmental policy, about organizational behavior. So in Berkeley, my professor who taught me FinTech, he's the founder of FinTech at Berkeley House, Yaniv. And he also looks at the UC Berkeley Skydeck program, where startups predominantly, and those who are academically extremely celebrated, who create startups, they are positioned well and supported well by Berkeley to present to VCs and PEs across the globe. So the last I spoke to my professor, I am taking the Skydeck to India. To now help people within the ecosystem who are possibly from small towns and cities, and teach them the art of connecting with VCs and PEs globally. And I did tell my old professor, I said, do your student a favor. Whoever is the best of the best from India, and particularly women, let's take them next round to UC Berkeley and the Skydeck there. So I have his verbal and email consent. Let's see how I can build on it. Yesterday, I was at the Arizona State University. The president there, Michael Crow. I think that when we come to platforms such as this, it is not only to speak at or speak to or engage with an audience. It is also that you chance upon people who have such a vast knowledge ecosystem that you'd like to get possibly a look into. So Dr. Michael Crow, many here who are academic will know that spoke about the new systems of education and university policies in the US. And he has a paper written on issues of reallocation of resources, redistribution of resources across the healthcare spectrum, with a predominant view on healthcare and research. So I'm going to look that up as well. And my interface with Michael Crow was extremely, for me as a learner, was of great importance. And complementing it was the presence and my engagement with Vivek Lal, who leads General Atomics. Right. So with him, I mean, it is fascinating to have the blessed opportunity of oscillating between medical research and then talking to somebody about fusion, and talking to him about how to create more defense strategy systems for a country like India, and have transfer of technologies, not only, let's say, from the US to India, but what if you need it here as well, and you need to transfer something from India into the US? So I think it's even those collaborations, those conversations that enrich. And I think today, it's nice to see Pragya again. We are looking at possibly partnering on 2-3 other issues because she's very passionate about the issue of enterprise. And I would lie if I say that she's only passionate about women. The issue of enterprise. But it is not always the academic side that you see of people or the private sector side that you see of people. So I had the good fortune of meeting her son, Aryan. And I'm fascinated by the fact that he speaks great Hindi. Yeah. So I'm like one of those doting friends of mothers who are going E and O. And then I have a couple here who are the quintessential Gujarati couple. I don't know how many of you are Gujaratis, but there's that Nilesh Bhai right at the back with his wife. And they heard I'm in the city, so they came packing with some doklas and some mamras. And they're like, you must be hungry. So it's nice to be amongst people where you can talk policy, where you can talk politics, and when you can talk people.
No, really, this cross-sector collaboration that's already happening, or discussions, I'm loving that. That's really the essence of this conference and this initiative. Given that we're at Stanford now, if you had to think about what are collaborations that you see that would be really beneficial for women in South Asia with Silicon Valley technology.
From the last time I was on your platform, take away from what Pragya has said. There is a dearth of understanding academically about circumstances, current situations, and possibilities and potentials of the global South in the global North in terms of academia. There is a historical context one needs to consider that before the explosion of technology, people presumed everything that was happening, which is of tectonic shifts in the world, was happening only in the global North and particularly in this geography. But you have over 3 billion plus people on the other side of the world who are doing very well. As an Indian, I'm proud to say that 70% of our GDP is domestic in nature, actually. So we are positioned well to handle the shocks, economic or otherwise, of the world. I think as an Indian, I'm extremely proud of the fact that COVID was the best test of our capacity and our humanity. We created a vaccine within our country. We saw nations that were writing paper chits out, that were running out of toilet paper. We deployed that vaccine to 1.4 billion people, and then we distributed it to 160 countries. We did not hold global supply chains hostage. So I think my endeavor is to tell people that we are great people to collaborate with. We know how to share. And when your back is to the wall, there's no better friend than having an Indian by your side or an Asian by your side. Because we know how to fix problems when resources are not aplenty. We know to fix problems when you cannot possibly think of solutions and you're overwhelmed by surge of just despondency. So I think that is possibly the template on which I'm engaging with. And I believe that Pragya, in her just intervention in your panel this morning, just hit the nail on the head that you need to create more research and understanding. You cannot wish it away. If you can or if you want to, that is to your detriment, because as the world grows scarce in resources, as populations expand, you need to find new avenues of collaboration. And collaboration cannot happen when you pontificate.
We'd love to hear from any of you who would have any questions for Mrs. Irani as well. Otherwise, I have plenty, but I'd love to hear from you. Yes.
I think I'm pretty loud.
Yeah. I always say Indian women don't have a problem speaking out. They have a problem being heard. Yes.
Very true.
Yeah. Again, thank you so much for joining us today. In this morning's panel, you outlined all the metrics along which India, South Asia has been faring much better than the global averages, and breaking different ceilings and challenging the status quo. So I really appreciated all of that. I'd like to hear from you about how do you see India leading the way as an emergent economy, as a disruptor?
I don't think it's the Indian nature to present itself as a destructive disruptor. I think we are, just by genetic design, positioned to creating cohesive atmospheres for exchange of not only knowledge but also opportunity. And I think that's what's quintessentially different about being an Indian. That, and I'm again doffing my hat in absentia to Dr. Crow, he speaks about the invisible hand. It is not as though you come to the surface of discovery just because you had a light bulb moment. It's because you've read something somewhere and you have built on it. And I think that is another strength of Indians, that they don't suffer from the myopia to say, oh, I know it all, that they are open to a confluence of ideas, that they are open to a lot more research, a lot more matter on subjects which may not be pertinent only to the decision. For instance, there was no need for me to study all the subjects that I did as a minister. I could have very well sat very pretty on my chair and said, oh, I know everything. I don't. And I think that incessant thirst for knowledge, that incessant thirst to also bring knowledge to fruition, from taking innovation and idea to enterprise, I think that is going to be our greatest strength. So what I hope for in the future, and the immediate future for that matter, is we may have great ideas, but we have the capacity to collaborate and with respect do that collaboration. That even when we shared the vaccine, and again I'm going back to the vaccine because that's a globally acknowledged, achievement, we did not snub the 160 countries we were sharing with. We were not calling in IOUs. We were not speaking down to them. We reached out because we knew what it felt like not to have a solution and not to have the money even if you had the solution. So I think that's what gives me hope for the India of the future. We know when resources are low, and we know how to be humane at that exact moment. Yeah, you're audible.
Okay. Hi, Mrs. Irani. My name is Ashmi. I am very proud of some of the policies recently in India, like Beti Bachao and Ayushman Bharat. One thing I want to ask about is, where do you see India going from the perspective of women's safety? That has been one of the ongoing challenges for women to go to work in many places as the topic of this conference. But a lot of the progress has been made, and I'm curious what the focus is, both from a government and a social leadership perspective in not having women have to think about safety so much.
I think that the challenge is the presumption that as population explodes, you will reach a state of utopia where no challenge will ever exist. Idea is to have systems which are responsive to need when the challenge confronts you. And allow me to just substantiate what I'm saying. The nation you're sitting in right now, it's inhuman for me to say this, has a 17% higher crime rate than India. Should I reduce myself as a human being to say my per capita of violence against women and your per capita violence against women and have those conversations? No. I was the gender minister who presided administratively over the Nirbhaya Fund, so I can say this with evidence. We created 35 helplines for women across all states and a national helpline. In the past decade, we serviced 220 million calls. We created 700 crisis centers across the country, across every district. And then we added that in any district, if the population is double and so is the crime rate, then we will open double the amount of crisis centers. Many felt that it is a sign of rising crime. I said it's a sign of rising solutions. We had 1,063 fast-track courts which were created, out of which 444 were only for children who are victims of crime. And in the past 5 years, where I had administrative control, 200,000 plus cases got solved. I'm somebody who wrote and amended the Juvenile Justice Act and brought child pornography and made it punishable. But we also simultaneously ran 7,000 child welfare homes. But we recognized that it's not only the children who are traumatized, it is the caregivers, even those who were appointed by the government, who were also transacting in that trauma. And with NIMHANS, which is the premier institution in India on mental health, we made sure that 144,000 caregivers received counseling and mental health support. So I think that if governments stop responding and stop creating solutions, that's where challenges will emanate. Many our governments shy away because the numbers are so horrendous to confront with, because they get weaponized politically. The idea is who can move beyond that weaponization rhetoric and just keep the focus on issues that need administrative support. That's where maybe people like me come in. But you have to then factor one very, very startling fact. 80% of violence against women and children happens from people they know, people they are related to. So in a democracy, would you want the government to walk into your bedrooms? That is a challenge that you're confronted with. The safest country on the planet is Qatar, which is not a democracy. One of the top 10 safest cities in the world, one of them is Chinese. And then comes up the banner at the back which says stop. So, okay, not because it's Chinese, but because the time has run out.
We'll just take one final question from
Okay.
Kirtika.
It's incredible to hear of the impact that you have driven and led. My question is, how does the private sector best interface with the government?
Why do you need only the government to interface with?
Why do I only need? Is one of the partners. So, for example, you spoke about the incredible program that you're running in the villages with the certification.
So that's not government.
That's your personal.
That's not me personal. That's an alliance I created at the World Economic Forum. I had the privilege of creating the first ever Center for Female Leadership in the CII, which is the Confederation of Indian Industries. It has 435,000 Indian companies. I'm also the strategic advisor for the Confederation of All India Small Traders, which is 80 million traders and 48,000 trade associations. So that's my private side.
Incredible. So maybe the question is broader, is again, how can the private sector best interface with these different organizations?
The private sector is a part of it.
Okay.
It's just that we don't verbalize your participations. I'm calling out Pragya because, she's there, so she is one of the private sector support bases we have. If you'd like to join that cohort, by all means, I will tell you who in CII to connect with, because I'm ensuring that it's industry as unions, as associations that always keep the leverage so that it does not get individualized in terms of becoming only a single woman's purpose. I have the industry buy into it and the corporate leadership of India buy into it. Because I'm of the belief that the biggest misconception is democracy is government. We forget democracy is of the people, by the people, and for the people. So I've done the for the people bit because I'm a 3-time MP. Right now I'm doing by the people bit. So if you want to connect somebody in CII, happy to help.
And actually, just to wrap up, this flows very well into the next segment, which is a CII collaboration that we'd like to announce. So Gargi Pawar, who's here, she's running CII from Palo Alto office. And we've just signed a letter of intent. Gargi, you can come on stage and then we'll just describe. So we have the strategic partnership in the spirit of cross-sector collaboration with private sector players and CII, as well as civil society organizations and researchers and academia. We're essentially to bring more women into the workforce, and how do we enable that to happen within certain sectors, specifically with the CII Institute of Logistics, where we're trying to create an initiative where we can enable more women to enter in the logistics space. And Mrs. Irani, given that...
I used to be, once upon a time, 32 years ago, one of the first 3 women in India who did logistics.
Wow.
So I don't know what your industry is. I'm happy to help and connect you to that particular segment which can help women.
So
But
Kritika actually,
congratulations.
she started Facebook India, Meta, which is now, and has had a very, very lustrous career in the.
So
in
that's why the
industry.
300 city
Yeah.
thing connects with you. Yeah, but that's
Yeah.
one of the partners that somebody back in CIA and back in India in my office is chasing right now. So I'm supposed to go back home, and one of the first meetings after I land back is to look at all the technology partners. So can you imagine that? That's why women should network.
I wanted to say that CIA is very excited to work with Suhani and her team across Stanford, Hoover, and the Maina Mahila Foundation. They're doing some phenomenal work that aligns well with CII's vision of women empowerment and leadership in economy. A vision in which Mrs. Irani has been a powerful guiding and leading force. It's wonderful to have you, and nice to meet you as well. Just very briefly, Confederation of Indian Industry, CII, is a non-government, not-for-profit, industry-led and industry-managed organization, which has members across the private and the public sectors as well. We have offices spread all across India, and primarily the centers of excellences, which I work very closely with from this particular office, are the developmental arm of CII, and with them, along with all our global offices and institutional partnerships, such as these, we work very closely with the Indian government and as a point person and a point reference for international business community. The Institute of Logistics is one of the 13 centers of excellences of CII, and it plays a pivotal role in accelerating growth and competitiveness in the sector across supply chain and the logistics space. They work towards the modernization of the sector as well, setting up global benchmark standards, driving capacity development, and pushing the industry agenda through policy advocacy. Together with Suhani and the team, we are working on outlining the roles and responsibilities across research, analysis, training, recruitment, and coordination between all the institutions as we take this particular research initiative forward. Bridging the gender gap in the workforce is of critical importance across sectors and regions in India. And as this initiative and partnership evolves, we will bring in other arms of CII as well to develop and initiate strategies aimed at increasing women's participation and advancement in the workforce. Thank you, and over to you again.
Thank you so much. So just very briefly to show you, we want to increase women in logistics. And for that, we want to bring in the different stakeholders here. So these are the different stakeholders that at the moment we are including as part of this collaboration. Would love for anybody here to join if you're keen on working on in logistics or have any ideas for us as well as we develop this. That's all. We'd love to have, just a little photo up with Gargi and with Shweta here from Maina Mahila. But really, please first, can you join me in thanking Mrs. Irani for her Q&A and for her time? Really, it's been such an honor to have her here. Thank you.
So now we move into the third part of the day, which will focus on the demand-side constraints and solutions. Basically, what's happening on the employer side when it comes to hiring and keeping women in the workforce. To dive deeper into this, we will hear from Lisa Ho, postdoctoral associate, Yale Economic Growth Center with Inclusion Economics. As Rohini Pandey mentioned in her keynote earlier today, Lisa's research is on something many of us instinctively know, but now have data for. How maternity leave policies, while important, can have unintended consequences on women. So please put your hands together to welcome Lisa.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much to Suhani and the conference organizers for inviting me. And thank you for the very nice introduction. So I'm Lisa Ho, and I'm currently a postdoc at Yale University. And today I'll be talking about a research project that examines the employment effects of an extended maternity leave mandate in India that went into effect in 2017. So this is a project that's joint work with Garima Sharma, who's at Northwestern University, and Shreya Tandon, who's at Harvard University, as well as Pulak Ghosh at IIM Bangalore and Stephanie Howe at Revelio Labs. So we were motivated to study this question by some of the patterns in the data that Professor Pandey highlighted during her keynote lecture this morning. So participation in the labor force is particularly low, somewhat puzzlingly, among women in India who are more educated and among women who live in urban areas. So approximately 40% of women in rural areas are in the labor force compared to only 25% of women who live in urban areas. Similarly, labor force participation doesn't increase with education, which is surprising given that we would think people with more skills have higher potential wages if they were to enter the labor market. Education is actually highest for women with below a primary education and lowest for women who have a secondary education. This is all women who are outside of the labor force entirely, so women who are not looking for work. Once we look within the labor force, so at women who are trying to get employment but are unable to get it, we see that unemployment rises with education and that a huge gender gap emerges in unemployment, particularly at the level of tertiary education. So for people who have a tertiary education, 10% of men are unemployed compared to 21% of women. So there's a huge group of women who are unemployed, who are tertiary educated, who have a tertiary education and kind of have the skills to work. So that raises this question of if these urban women are highly educated, they have the required skills to work, and they're actually out there looking for jobs, they want to work, what's stopping them? A lot of the literature in academic literature recently has focused on labor supply factors, and what we want to look at in the study is consider more the role of the demand side and consider employers' decisions to hire men versus hire women. And so in this paper, what we'll look at is the decisions that firms face when there's an increasing cost of hiring female workers relative to hiring similar male workers. In particular, we're looking at a landmark change to formal sector employment for women that was passed in India in 2017, which was this amendment to maternity leave policy that extended the length of mandated leave that firms had to offer from 12 weeks to 26 weeks. This was described kind of by policymakers as a labor supply lever. So it described as a way to keep women in the labor market after childbirth by making it easier for them to return to work after they'd given birth. This actually made India the third most generous country in paid maternity leave, behind only Canada and Norway at the time. In considering the policy effects, though, they did not necessarily seem to anticipate a strong demand-side response, so a strong response from employers. But if employers react to the increased price of female workers, that could undo any response from the workers' side of being more willing to work. So in this paper, we look at the short-term impacts of the reform on young women's labor market outcomes. The data that we're using is from the Employee Provident Fund organization. So this is the organization that takes Social Security contributions, and that means that we can see all formal sector workers who earn 15,000 rupees or less per month. To study this, we'll use an empirical strategy called the difference in differences strategy, where we basically compare outcomes for women versus male workers before and after the reform at firms that were already offering the more generous 26 weeks of leave versus firms that were not previously offering the generous weeks of leave and so had to change their policies at the firm in response to the policy change passed in Parliament. Our main results that we find will be that there's an approximately 5% decline in women's employment, even just 6 months after the reform went into effect in 2017. And we find that the effect is concentrated on young women, who you might say are kind of most at risk of childbirth from the employer's perspective and having to actually take a maternity leave that would be costly. In contrast, we see no effect on employment of men. So to give you a little bit of context for those who are not familiar, family leave policies in India apply to all establishments, formal sector establishments, with 10 or more employees. Initially, there was a Maternity Benefit Act passed in 1961, which guaranteed 12 weeks of paid leave. And then there was no change to maternity leave policy, or no major change, until 2016-2017, when Parliament decided to pass a law, first in the upper house and then in the lower house, that the length of weeks that firms had to offer got extended from 12 weeks to 26 weeks. And that went into effect in April 2017. A key question here, kind of economically, is who is actually paying the wages, who's paying for maternity leave. And that remained the same both pre and post reform. So for workers who are earning less than 15,000 rupees per month, and that's the set of workers who we're looking at here, the salary is paid by the employee's state insurance corporation. But for the employer, they still have to pay the cost of losing this worker for an additional 14 weeks and having to find a replacement. So it still increased the cost of hiring a female worker relative to a similar male worker. What we do is this difference in difference is designed to estimate the causal impact of the maternity leave amendment on labor market outcomes. And we'll kind of run our analysis at the establishment level, looking month by month. And we'll look at firms that were already offering 26 weeks of leave before the reform compared to firms that had to change their policies, that they had to now offer 26 weeks when previously they wanted to offer less maternity leave to workers. We allow for differences between firms that were offering more leave versus less leave pre and post reform. And we also kind of control for time trends just because they're across different industries, there are kind of different trends in employment over time. What we then do is try to look at what the treatment effects are, and those will be what are plotted on the next slide, in the time periods relative to when the reform was passed in March 2017. So our set of control establishments, so the places that we say are unaffected by the reform, are those that were already offering 26 weeks before the law was passed. Okay, so this is showing our first set of results, which is that the reform decreased women's employment by approximately 5% just 6 or 7 months after the reform was passed. So on the left side, you see the months kind of before the reform, and you can see that relative to the month before the reform, employment for women was approximately level. Whereas after the reform was passed, the first 2-3 months, we don't see any effect, but then we start to see a decline in women's employment up through months 6 or 7. And this, in terms of magnitudes, is about a 5% decline in overall women's employment. In comparison, we see no effect for male workers. So both before the reform, before time period 0, and after the reform, we see just a flat line. So it doesn't seem like employers stop hiring women workers and then start hiring male workers. They just seem to cut back on employment overall. And so the size of these establishments shrinks in terms of number of workers, and there are fewer women relative to male workers after the reform is passed relative to before. We also look differentially by worker age. So we might expect, if this is driven by employers' concerns that women are going to give birth and they're going to leave, that this would be kind of concentrated on women who are most at risk of childbirth. And consistent with this, we find that the effect is entirely concentrated on women who are kind of younger workers, aged 18 to 35. When we look at women who are 35 years or older, we actually don't see any negative employment effects for them. So this really seems to be driven by workers who employers worry might want to take the maternity leave and be gone for 26 weeks. Okay, so just to conclude, what we find from the effects of this policy to maternity leave that made women workers essentially more expensive relative to male workers is that in the short term, extending the length of mandated leave decreased female employment by 5%, and that effect was concentrated on women of childbearing age, and there was no substitution to male workers. There was just an overall decrease in employment. So in terms of implications for policy, it seems like one kind of takeaway is that we should consider both the labor supply side, so workers deciding to work, as well as the demand side, so what employers' decisions are in their hiring when considering responses to policy changes. And related to what has been discussed on other panels, policymakers, it makes sense for them to think about how these reforms not only affect the decisions of workers to work or not work, but how they might affect the business case for hiring female workers. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Lisa. And that was a perfect segue into the next panel discussion of the day, the business case for hiring and retaining women across industries. So we'll hear from the tech industry, manufacturing industry, as well as the maritime industry. So we have Suhani Jalota moderating this panel, and our panelists that I'd love to welcome include Kirtika Reddy, CEO and co-founder of Verix, and the ex-managing director of Facebook India and South Asia, Rohini Pandey, Mr. Rajiv Jalota, and Lakshmanan Chittambaram, or CTL, president of the Tech Mahindra Group and head of Mahindra Group Americas. Please put your hands together to welcome all the panelists.
Okay, great.
So thank you, everybody, for staying till the afternoon. We have a really incredible panel ahead. And look at the people here. This really speaks for all of their experience. And I'm really excited to bring this topic about the business case for hiring and retaining women with this illustrious panel. So in my experience of talking to many private companies over the last few months, as we had for the report that we were writing, I'd often go to them and tell them that, look, we have more than 10,000 women waiting for jobs. What do we do? Do you have any flexible work arrangements? Can we do remote work opportunities? What can we do? And then I would be sent to the CSR or DEI teams. Talk to them. They deal with the women. And this aspect of why women conversations should be a diversity or an inclusion issue to begin with, given that this is half of the population, then really got me thinking much more about what is the business case. We need to have a much stronger understanding of the business case, and that there is probably one, but probably the messaging across sectors is not as clear. Corporates probably understand the costs of hiring women, not as much maybe even the benefits. They may understand, may not fully have internalized it, maybe not across all levels. Maybe the governments are not providing enough support to enable the business case. And so where do we stand? Where is the evidence? What do we know? What do we not know? I think that's where we really want to dig deeper into in this panel today. I'll start with Mr. Lakshmanan, coming from the industry perspective, coming from Mahindra Group. Just where have you seen there to be, if any, differences in productivity and performance between men and women across any of the companies? And where does the Mahindra Group stand with the business case for hiring women? And where do you stand with that?
So thank you, Suhani. And just as an introduction, the Mahindra Group is a $23 billion conglomerate. One pillar of the group is core engineering and manufacturing. So it makes two-wheelers, four-wheelers, six-wheelers, eight-wheelers, small aircrafts, so on and so forth. The second pillar is technology, which is a very different business. It's Tech Mahindra, $6.2 billion in revenues, 130,000 people worldwide, and 90% of revenues coming from outside India. So, and the third part is a group of companies like Mahindra Sustain, which is into renewable energy, Mahindra Holidays and Resorts, so on and so forth. So that's the view of the group for you, right? And from our perspective, in the last 3 years, it's very difficult, first of all, to directly measure productivity from employing, let's say, women in the workforce. Because at the end of the day, it's a joint workforce, men, women, a diverse workforce that's delivering the goods, right? So then there are subtle indicators. So from the Mahindra Group's perspective, in the last 3 years, we've employed twice more women, right, into the workforce. And if you look at the performance of the group overall in the last 3 years, it's now the largest tractor manufacturer in the world, number 3 in the US, 42% market share in India, the largest SUV manufacturer in India with a 24% market share. So if you take all this, the world is changing so rapidly. If you have all men work in the workforce, it's a monochrome view of the world, in a rapidly changing world. So diverse views, diverse thoughts, all come in, when women, men, all of them bring their best to the table, right? And so we believe that the subtle indicators are in two forms. One is women feel more inclusive in the workplace. And at the end of the day, we are a for-profit enterprise. We're not doing something which sounds good, which is a CSR initiative. It has to make sense for the business, right? And so what we are now seeing is hiring managers going out and saying that we want women, right? Because they're seeing productivity, right? And then the environment that's getting created where it's more inclusive, right? And less attrition for women. All this we are seeing. These are all the empirical statistics that we are seeing right now. And from our perspective, the other way it is translated into reality is if you look at the Mahindra Group, the brand presence, right? The fact that it's a more inclusive workplace. We've become the employer of choice. These are all very subtle indicators. You can't put a percentage figure to each of these, but every year when we look at this, it's getting stronger and stronger. So now the thought process is, what do we bring to the table to retain women, right? And And what are the additional avenues to discover and bring back women? So one of the initiatives that we have launched is called SOAR, SOAR. And that focuses on bringing back women with 5 years of experience who've had a break in their professional life, right? And then bringing them back, not into any other job, but into mainstream jobs, which are relevant to where they were when they took the break, right? And so you're going ahead, that involves multiple levels of interventions, and there's a cost to doing it, and it makes sense because it's delivering value.
Right. No, I mean, that's great. And I think the companies are taking a lot of initiatives, it seems, across, because they realize that this is important. I think quantifying, as you maybe have highlighted, is maybe still a challenge. Like, what is really the contribution of the women? What is the productivity? So, Professor Pandey, if we can come to you in terms of quantifying, I don't know, what data, evidence do we have on the productivity benefits and the costs to firms for hiring women? Where do we stand?
So, So let me start with a little bit more, I guess, at the macro level, and I alluded to this also in my talk. I think the seminal work from that was actually in the United States, looking at the period pre and post, say, the 1960s, when you had sort of civil rights acts that made discrimination against both blacks and women much less likely in the workforce. And what they look to see is what happens to productivity after that. And you find increases in productivity. And the explanation is very simply, in a period where we know men and women are both getting educated at high rates, you're going to maximize productivity by best allocating talent to the jobs that they should be matched with. And so if you think for both the distribution of men and women, let's say, this is very simplistic, but there's some ranking from the most productive to least productive. If you think of a marketplace that first employs all the men and then only after that comes to women, then the most productive woman is likely more productive than the least productive man. And this changes that remove the barriers to women are going to lead to increases in productivity. This is not just true in aggregate productivity. Another place where we've seen similar evidence is actually in politics, where you've often had gender quotas. So there's a paper that I always joke could only have been written by an all-male team. I think any woman who wrote such a paper would not get it published. It's called Mediocre Men. And it's about Sweden, where they introduced quotas on parties to have to have what they call the zipper list. So you had to have one woman and one man. What they showed was that one reason why what they call mediocre men persisted is that party leaders wanted to maintain their political base. And very often there was, they would maintain their base through men who would maybe bring in more money, who would actually sustain it, but were not as well performing as the best qualified women. So when you had the zipper law in place, and you had to kind of replace some of the men by women by law, you actually saw improvements in terms of the competence of the leaders who got elected. So, I mean, those are two examples of kind of gains of productivity. I think underlying it comes to the question, Suhani, you were asking about, why is it that companies aren't seeing the business case so easily? And I'm probably twice Suhani's age or close to that. So, I mean, I would love to say it's all about not making a good business case. Certainly there's some of that. I think certainly when people say things like, there are so few jobs, how can we start giving women jobs? I think you can talk about talent allocation, you can start talking about, but look at, who is topping class 12 exams, who's doing well in college. If you're not giving them jobs, you're doing worse. But there probably also is some amount of bias or discrimination. So one paper, which is from a very different setting, but I think speaks to this, is a nice recent paper by Eliza Marching co-authors, asking what happens when you try to employ women in jobs that don't match sort of the norm, the stereotype. So probably quite relevant for Mahindra. So they basically started training and then allocating women as mechanics in Uganda. What they found is if they just kind of did this and matched, employers were very happy to hire women and women did well. But when they asked employers, why are you hiring women? It was very much like, oh, women are diligent. We don't need to provide so much oversight. They do their job. So when they started actually providing alongside kind of potential employees, also a technology to audit to see who's doing how well, employees went back to wanting men who were no more productive. And so the paper is called Hidden Gender Discrimination, to say kind of, sometimes when you say you make the business case for women, you're not making it actually on productivity. You're making it on things like, I think there was an earlier slide saying that, women take smaller breaks. They actually are more diligent. And maybe at some level, that is also a problem because we are not recognizing productivity. So I think when you make a business case, I think we have to be careful when the business case is actually being made on, productivity, and how much is it being made on things like, they don't take breaks because, technology is changing. Employers can surveil employees much better now. And that's not a case that will survive more.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I think many of the docile characteristics of women often make them more attractive for employers. Is that a good thing or a bad thing in the short term and the long term? Yeah. And yeah, I think there's a lot of those questions around that as well. And, before, Kritika, I just wanted to see if you have any comments to make on what Mr. Lakshmanan and Professor Pandey said, and then I'll ask you.
I'll add a few anecdotes to kind of illustrate what was said. So one actually starts with a personal story of, I would say, talking about bias, unconscious bias at this very institution that I'm so grateful for what it gave. So this was in my second year of my MBA fall semester. There was an iconic class that was co-taught by Andy Grove and Bergelman called Strategy in Action. And the TLDR there is strategy is action. You can have something on paper that you write, but what you actually spend your time on is what is strategy. So evaluate that and make sure it's a winning one. So it was something that I really wanted to go and attend. Now the challenge was that, or the beauty, either way, was I was pregnant 1 quarter into the first year of business school, and I was severely challenged in my ability by the administration to say, are you sure you can do this course? You're going to have an infant, you can only miss 2 classes, it's very rigorous, are you sure you can do this? Right? And I'm going to take that as stemming from deep concern versus skepticism. But my child was born 2 weeks before fall, which meant I skipped exactly 2 classes, finished the course, finished top of the class, graduated as an R.J. Miller scholar. I actually walked the stage with her. She had her own graduation gown. Right? Okay. So it was really cute. And so fast forward, like maternity bias is the most significant gender bias of all. And we see a 39% mid-career drop-off. And you really have to think is how much of that stems from attitudes. And I've seen, again, in the workplace, after that I was an investor at SoftBank, we had a woman who had a new baby and the manager was making decisions for her saying, I'm not going to send her for this important assignment. And that actually came from actual care. But why is someone else making that decision for you? Let me make the decision myself. An example of where it worked was actually at Facebook. We had someone who joined us who was pregnant to come lead staffing for us, and she came from the other internet giant. And we could have said, oh my God, we're ramping up so quickly. Can we really afford 6 months for the person to be gone? Well, this one, she transformed the whole system in the 3 months before she went on maternity. She was off for 6 months, had a whole leadership team in place. She stayed with Meta for over 10 years, went up to lead staffing at an APAC level. So one just has to push ourselves to think, was that 6-month break that you had, would you have not hired the candidate because of that and lost the opportunity for 10 years of impact? So there's a lot of attitudes in here that need to be challenged. And I would really urge everyone at all parts of the ecosystem to challenge.
Yeah, completely. Thank you for sharing that personal experience as well. So Mr. Rajiv, so wanted to ask you a little bit about your experience, in case it's not obvious. So just from your government perspective, what are some government policies that you've seen have actually enabled more of a business case for firms, that have maybe helped firms in some way, reduce the cost of hiring women, increase the benefits to firms for hiring women? And you can also discuss any examples from the maritime industry or any of the industries you work with.
First of all, I think to set the context right, I come from the government sector, where giving leaves is a norm. So nobody worries that 6 months, 10 months leave. You have to give, it's like that. So in my 37 years of government service, I never faced a situation that we were not hiring anybody is hired based on merit, a woman or a man. So there is no distinction per se. So I think that way government is a best hiring company per se, you can say. Now coming to the port sector or the maritime sector, you are saying that yes, this sector is more male dominated sector. So like I was representing Mumbai port, at the port you go, you will not see, I think, any woman working at the port. But yes, in the office there are large number of workers working. But because I had to do a lot of research for this panel, because for me it's all new, corporate hiring and also. So that is why I saw one paper of World Bank, Reshaping Norms, a New Way Forward, post-COVID 2022 they wrote, and which was only on South Asia. And they said that the labor force participation, which everybody is talking, female is the lowest in South Asia, 23%. But the paper brings out a very important fact that if gender parity norms are followed, then there will be a 20% rise in GDP of those countries over a longer run. This all goes to show that there will be an increase in productivity with women. Then there may be various reasons to it. But this is the case for it. From a personal example, in early 90s, Maharashtra government brought out a policy that there will be reservation for women in the Gram Panchayats. So these are the rural governing bodies, and it was a very, very big change, but a progressive government took that call. Fortunately, when I joined that particular department, I remained there for 3 years, and initial phase it happened. And what I found a big change, that these women leaders, they actually were focusing more on education and health in the villages. Because there were villages where male were also governing and there were villages where females were governing, and one could see the stark difference. That time I think we were not having economists like Rohini and all to study, but yes, that is an area to study, that how does that help in, because that will increase the ultimately economic outcomes of the society when health and education improves. So just an initial take on this, yeah.
Yeah. And you'd also mentioned about some nudges, financial incentives potentially that the government could provide, and or in the case of maritime, redesigning ships and any of that. Could you maybe describe what are ways in which more women can actually enter?
Actually, what has happened in maritime sector, that maritime sector, one is talked about more is the seafaring sector. Means the seafarers, they drive the ships and the engineers, they run the ships. There the women labor force participation is just 1.28% across the globe. It's very, very low. It's very low. But in the last few years, International Maritime Organization actually started Women in Maritime, that concept. And because of that, they said that there should be a gender parity in all forms of engagement in maritime sector, be it seafaring, be it shipbuilding, be it maritime logistics, and all these places. It is just, I think, 6-7 year old story. And that is why a lot of companies in the maritime sector started looking at it from the gender perspective. And then government came in the picture. Like Scandinavian and European governments, they started giving a lot of subsidies and tax breaks for increasing gender parity. Then similarly in India, there is the Directorate General of Shipping Office, which is the regulator for the government. They started issuing guidelines that there should be more women hired by the Indian flag ships. Then they started offering a lot of scholarships to women who will take cadet courses as well as rating courses. 5 years back, India had 0.5% women seafarers. It has increased to 1.4% just in 5 years. And what has happened across now, the various shipping companies, Maersk shipping company among the top ones, they are actually female participation, seafarers have become 5.5%. In India, they started their own women-focused hiring process, wherein they will give on-board training, because this is very, very important issue in maritime, that you train a cadet, but onboard training is not given on time. So that cadet then takes a long time to get jobs. Here they started offering for women immediate onboarding, and rate of women employment in Maersk India tripled between 2021 to 2023, just in 3 years' time. Synergy Shipping, they actually started designing their vessels which were multi-gender. So they took a call that they will be an engineer, they will be an officer, and they will be a cadet. All three on one ship together. Otherwise, there used to be, because these cargo ships which go, they have only 20-25 people working on a ship. So one woman used to be there. So then there were safety issues and all these various directives have now been issued. So based on that, Synergy Shipping, actually it's a small company, not compared to like Maersk or CMA CGM, but it got the IMO Best Gender Parity Award because they designed like that. Then what started happening, that the ships actually are owned by a particular company, but they get flagged in a particular country. So you will see that ships are flagged in various countries. So the flag state is important because the ship has to follow the norms of the flag state. So many of the flag states now have issued guidelines that the ship design has to be multi-gender. So when the ship will go for a survey, the survey company will have to see that it is taking care of all infrastructure which is related to females.
And if I can just pause, so it seems that the reason why more women in maritime is even beneficial is because, at least in some conversations, it seems that women have shown there have been some productivity differences. Women-only warehouses have apparently outperformed men-only warehousing in maritime in some companies. So we have some evidence that there is a reason and a need for doing this, which is why the companies are building these sorts of changes. So actually, Mr. Lakshmanan, bringing back, talking about scaled up efforts, as Dad was also talking about these sorts of global efforts that are being made. What are some of the practices that Mahindra Group has scaled up and things that you feel have actually shown a stronger need for more women coming in across countries? What have you done well, you think? And I think you'd also mentioned at once about supply chain efforts in, say, China, where the factories are much larger. So how does that affect factory sizing in areas where we need more women, and why is that beneficial?
Sure. I'll give you an umbrella view, which could look like we're straying a little away from the topic, but there's a reason. The world's supply chain is completely skewed. We saw some of it during the pandemic, right? And after the pandemic, things subsided, so I think the world lulled into complacency a bit. I'll give you some statistics. 85% of commercial shipbuilding happens in 3 countries in Asia-Pac. China, South Korea, Japan.
93%.
93%. I'm sitting next to the other part is chips. 92% of chips is from Taiwan. Forget China blockading Taiwan, that's a different story. You need lots of clean water to manufacture chips. And Taiwan had a drought 2 years ago. Now just look, a SUV that we are rolling out has 200 chips, right? And so the world supply chain is very skewed. And Germany bought 56% of its power from Russia and thought they had no problems. If you come back to the US, the China Kool-Aid that we've drunk is out of control. I have a customer, the largest market is the US, 92% of sourcing is China. So this imbalance has to get corrected, right? It's not China +1, China +2, right? You need to correct this imbalance for the betterment of the world, right? And so we are now seeing a conscious attempt of organizations trying to move out. And that's where this happens, saying you want to move out, but the large factories in India are 15 to 16,000 people, whereas China has got 150,000 people. Look at the scale, right? And so if you look at India, let's focus on India now, the most populated country in the world, right? And the opportunity, the last 10 years was information technology for India. The next 10 years can be manufacturing. Can and should be manufacturing. So that window is for India's to lose, right? And for that, the workforce has to quadruple. The Viksit Bharat vision that the Prime Minister has painted out says India should be a $1 trillion economy by 2050, right? If that has to happen, where will this additional workforce come from? There's a huge women, audience that we need to target, right? And so from the Mahindra Group's perspective, there were a couple of initiatives we launched which had nothing to do with all this. They did it because it was the right thing to do. There were two schemes. One is called Nanni Kali. Right? 2% of the group's profits go into CSR, focus on only one thing, razor sharp focus. Nanni Kali, which is the development of the girl child. A World Bank report showed that if you focus on the girl child, that country's GDP goes up. Right? There's no big science behind it, very clearly. So the focus is on the girl child. And what they've done with that is that they focus on girls between the 6th grade and the 10th grade. They sit with them after class. So they've tied up with, colleges where underprivileged children go to school, right? Over 2,700 schools. And they sit with them and teach them financial skills, literacy skills. They teach them, they've introduced football now. So it teaches them resilience, it teaches them leadership skills, right? And they find that the biggest drop happens is after school, they get pulled into something else. They never enter the workforce. So Nanni Kali prevents that, right? We're so proud. It costs $80, right, to sponsor a child for this. And, the second is a program called Kabil, right? And Sheetal Mehta is the CEO, and your mom, Rupali, is involved, and they've done phenomenal work. I'm so glad that as an ambassador for the group, I get to talk about Kabil. Kabil is an online platform. It also identifies school-going children as well as college-going women, and it trains them on all these skills, soft skills, right? How to dress, how to talk, math skills. Then it also identifies workspaces where work is needed, right? Where it could be in caregiving, it could be in accounting, it could be in apparel manufacturing. So they identify all that. Then they identify the women and they find the skill gaps. And they do specific skill gap training to get them to be productively employed, right? And so that whole thing, they've touched 1 million women so far. 1 million women. In Nanni Kali, 870,000 girl children. Anything for scale, it's India. You can't beat it, right? And so, to us, I think all this, right, gets you on that, in this mode, where if India can get this, you'll productively employ, and lead the world from a friendshoring country perspective. Smriti Irani today morning said, right, we've never approached the world with hostility. So you need friendshoring countries who can now become the next substitute. From a China perspective, I think the opportunity is there, and getting all of this going is going to be very important.
Yeah, totally agree. Thanks for bringing up all those programs. Kirtika, do you think the role of, and you've been a strong torchbearer for this, the role of technology and AI in building more of this sort of business case? Where do you think this is more of, it brings more women in, it excludes women? What do you think and companies are doing about this?
Yeah. So I'm a technologist and an optimist, and certainly have seen a huge believer in the role of technology in actually addressing some of these inequities that we have spoken about. I'll call out Reena, who's here. She runs Mom Relaunch, and how beautifully she's used technology in terms of both, for example, seeing the whole Salesforce wave, partnering with that company, getting people trained on the right set of skills, and then creating that whole ecosystem for training, learning, and putting them back in the workforce. She also beautifully, partners with Verix, and we are a trust layer, and she uses that to create skills passport for these women, such that they can carry that and take them around wherever they're being employed. Really increasing the trust factor, the pace in which that verification, that employment happens, and happens on an ongoing basis. Another example I'll give you is when I was at SoftBank as an investor, I led an investment in a company called Eightfold.ai. It's a talent intelligence platform. And what they do is they take a resume, they create an AI-first model of the person and do matching to the right job and surface the right jobs for that particular person. So what they were seeing is that some of the companies were seeing almost a 50% increase in diverse candidates. And they said to themselves, why? What's happening? Well, research shows that when men look at a role and they see a 60% match with a role, they think they're the perfect things to slice bread for that particular role. And when women look at a role, I can see several different nods here. What's the percentage that they think that they need to match to apply for a role? 80 to 100%, right? And so the roles being surfaced to candidates where candidates looked at it and said, really, I am the right person for this role? I would have never thought about applying for this role. And that was what was driving the increase. So for sure, let's not take our eyes away from everything that we need to do to make sure that AI has all of the ethical AI, transparent AI, all of that to prevent biases from going in. But my challenge for all technologists in this room is really about how is it that they can employ technology to solve those problems. And also to add to that, then making sure there's the right workforce. And I'm so encouraged by the initiatives here and the change that has caused. Because if we look at women in AI, across the largest companies, you're talking about 10%, 12%. This is Meta, Google. And if they're not going to be reflective of the population that they serve, you are going to have these biases seeping in. So we really need to make sure that we change that pendulum. And we're so excited to share that Verix, in partnership with the government of India, and this is now a sneak peek and an announcement for this special community, we're going to be announcing on Monday an initiative called AI Kiran. And Kiran is about spotlight and rays of light. You can't be what you can't see, so we're going to start with recognition for women in AI in India and really invest in that community. So as India becomes a $1 trillion economy, we have the right participation. So we're very excited about that and invite everyone here to participate. And I'm sure we'll be having many conversations with this group as well on everything that we can do. And I should say, to your point of all of these conversations, I met with Youth Ki Awaaz, Anshul. We said, okay, we should partner. So it was the first introduction, partnership struck. He's in our announcement on Monday. So there can be more that happens. So, so thank you, Suhani, for bringing us all together.
That's great. That's amazing. And actually, just wanted to have follow up on one question. We haven't yet spoken about startups and that industry, entrepreneurship. In general, we know there are fewer investments made in women-led startups. What might we do to create more understanding, awareness, or even just create that business case for women-led startups? What is missing?
Yeah, so Swani, I mean, when you talk about the other metrics there, I think there's been study after study, whether it's a McKinsey, whether it's a Harvard, like every single organization has looked at this and said, diverse board perform better, diverse executive teams perform better. There's just study after study. And then you have to just think to yourself, after all of that, why is there still a gap? The number of women founders in running deep tech companies, what do you think? What's the percentage of female founders in deep tech companies? Running deep tech companies, yeah? Yeah, single digit, 4%, right? 4%. And so there are many structural challenges. There are structural challenges around, there was a study done about the questions that are asked for women founders versus male founders. Male founders will get asked by VCs about, what is the upside? Like, how big can this grow? A woman is asked, this is a study about what are the risks, what are the downsides, how are you protecting against that? And of course, the woman begins to answer the question and they're taking notes of all of the risks. And the man answers the questions about the opportunity and the notes are being taken about the opportunities. And I've had my partners who, in an IC investment committee group, they sent two groups, one a male founder and one a female founder with the exact same script, exact same data, same level of confidence, and one walked away with 100 times more in terms of their investment versus the female, right? So that is what we're dealing with, and I think it behooves all of us on both sides of people writing checks and then people asking for checks to be aware of these dimensions and to really make the shift that we really need to see.
So we need a lot more solutions. And Professor Pandey, would you be able to shed any light on any solutions that you feel, maybe we have evidence on those, or any pilots that have been done, any scaled up solutions around where either in startup space or otherwise, women have been able to enter, and companies or industries or governments have recognized the need for more women, not as a DEI, but as business case? What do we know on that?
We don't know as much as we would like to know, so I'm scratching my head. I think I mentioned one of the things earlier that one of the things we seem to know is that women are good for women. So I think companies where you see either female ownership or you see female management are better for having more female employees. So I think, again, often, and that's the flip side of diversity, I suspect female managers feel more pressure on them to show that they're doing things not for what may be perceived as DEI, but for productivity. But actually, that seems to sometimes go against what we see in the data. So, I mean, I think that's one place we've seen some evidence of success. I think Namrata Adani earlier was talking about masking. I think issues, for instance, where you don't not just have masking, but for instance, there's Nina Russi had a nice study showing that defaulting also matters a lot on platforms. So when you're putting out these job ads, where a lot of these platforms will ask you to type in what you expect your starting salary to be. So instead of that, if you just have a default that they could possibly change, it can help increase for women at least the expectation of what they would see if both men and women tend to default to what they have. So I think simple ways of actually trying to affect these biases by automating as much as you can of this data seems to be helpful. Iris Bonet had a book a while ago arguing how it's much easier to change institutions than it is to change people and their biases. I think goes in that direction, especially as we see more and more use of tech in setting up at least the first stages of job applications and so on. You can automate a lot there to make sure that people, at least both sides, the hiring and the side giving information, start with knowing, for instance, this fact that the average person applying for a job has only 60% match with the job. You could have that at the top, right?
Absolutely. So in the final couple of minutes, I guess, if anybody on the panel wants to comment on strategies to reduce the cost for firms to hire women or strategies to increase productivity for women to be hired.
See, I'll make a quick point. Earlier in factories, because Mahindra has a number of factories, it was male-dominated. But now with robotics becoming mainstream, women are now finding a place on the shop floor, and that population is beginning to grow rapidly. So technology is enabling more women to get into the workplace as well.
So that's reducing the cost of hiring.
It's reducing the cost of hiring. Productivity is on par with male workers. So the business case, everything has to stand on a business case. The business case works out.
I think another way of putting a question is not so much about reducing the cost of hiring women, but equalizing the cost across men and women. So I think Alessandra briefly alluded to this earlier when she was talking about paternity leave policies. I don't think we have great evidence that paternity leave policies directly, help women's careers, but both they seem to have effects on how kids perceive, the roles of men and women. But it also equalizes a bit the cost if men also become more expensive when they have kids, not just women.
Yeah.
I'm going to take the contrarian view and say, we pay our recruiters twice their commission if they get us a woman engineer, right? Because we don't have enough women engineers, and we believe in that business case. So we are actually paying more to make sure, because we believe that the business case still works even if you do that.
Even so more.
Yeah.
You have to work out the total cost dynamics. What is the return of investment? Say, because of maternity, you are having some lost man days or woman days, you may call. But the overall productivity, what all is coming out in maritime sector per se during my research, all the companies, they have come out that DP World says my 25% supervision has come down in all women warehouse. And this experiment has happened in UAE, India and Africa. Maersk, the port of Rotterdam, They are taking women leaders to 40% by 2027. They say that my productivity is so high. So I think you balance out whether that small cost you are paying, price you are paying, and plus the gains you are getting, what Kritika also mentioned, it is coming in maritime companies as well, that women are more conscious and errors are very, very less, and that is another area where you save on a lot of costs. So it has to balance out per se. And I believe, say for example India, it has to grow so much. The next decade is of India. An example I give of always of EXIM trade. Presently our EXIM trade is 1.4 billion tons. It has to grow to 5.5 billion tons by 2050. If it has to grow 3.5 times from now, who else will work? If only men can work, you need equal amount of women or more women to work to see all this happening. And with digitalization, I think women are now working everywhere. You have smart containers, you have smart trucks, all kind of things are being managed. Even women are being used from working from home to monitor all this. I gave you example that day of Shravan shipping, that they have employed in Vizag women working from home, and they say that productivity is as high or even higher than earlier.
And they're working from home, monitoring the ships.
So these type of things will become a possibility in future.
And Suhani, if I may add, Mothers at Mahindra is a scheme that was launched, landmark in India, 5-year maternity support program. Not 1 or 2 years, 5 years, interventions before, during and after. And like I said, we are a for-profit company. It should make
business sense
to do it.
Mahindra factory in Chakan has
Yeah.
women forklifters.
Absolutely.
They are working.
Absolutely.
And more competent than men in terms of productivity.
Well, great. That is a strong business case. If there's any burning questions, we can take one question, I think. If anybody, yes, you raise your hand first.
It's all very nice to talk about women to get more work. It's going to take away everyone's job. Forget women. We've got agentic AI, we've got the physical AI. So should we work at all?
Great question to end on. Very difficult one.
So AI is definitely changing the workforce, right? And as the adage goes, AI is not going to replace jobs. People who know AI will replace the jobs of people who don't know AI, right? And so that's what each one of us need to be thinking about, is how are each one of us really on the forefront of how we are using AI to increase our productivity 5x, 10x, and be at that forefront, right? So that's one. But two, for sure, it's going to cause displacement of a huge population. And in these changes, unfortunately, it is women. But you saw COVID, women had like much higher of an impact. Technology changes like this, much higher of an impact. And so anything that we can be doing as a private sector, as a public sector, to make sure women are on top of that technology change, we should be doing. And really it goes both ways. It goes from an individual perspective, and I'm on the board of WITI that is about women in technology. And the CEO says, it's just fascinating that I see women gravitating towards the management, the soft skill courses, and more men gravitating towards, even if there are free courses, right, the hard tech courses. So it does start at that individual level. It starts as a societal level of what we're encouraging our girls and our boys to do. And then it goes all the way to a professional level as well.
All great points, Kritika. I just want to add, we have 130,000 people, we've seen a 30% improvement using AI, which means your work should be coming down, right? And it will come down. So the whole thing is going to change. But I've always felt every crisis is an opportunity, right? So from our perspective, what are we doing? We're moving higher up the value chain. At one point, we did time and material work, then we did fixed price work, then we did outcome-based work. Now we are taking end-to-end business processes, automating the hell out of it, bringing our own IP and going up the value chain, and customers will begin to move money away from what they save here into transformation and more higher end work, right? Everything is IT driven now. So, there's a lot of good things going.
Yeah. Any final question? Okay. We have 1 minute. Yes.
In AI, we are all at an equal advantage and disadvantage right now, where the technology is. Is there opportunity to skill people, especially women, to kind of take advantage of that? And is that happening, whether in India or elsewhere?
So the short answer is 100% yes. And the more we make sure that they're there at the beginning, the less you have to catch up. And truly, I can't stress that enough. The more we emphasize in the beginning, Meta did their diversity report where they said, listen, if we have to get the right diversity at this stage, we have to fire everyone and start again, because it's just not possible to catch up. So if we don't have women jump into the AI bandwagon now, we're again going to be at a place where it's going to take 100 years for gender equality to catch up, which is why initiatives like AI Kiran that we're launching on Monday in the government is actually putting a whole amount of support government of India is putting a whole amount of support around even their recent budget in terms of the dollars that are allocated for, or rupees that are allocated for women startups, entrepreneurs, and more. And it really behooves each one of us to take advantage of the opportunity. Coming back right here to home, Tycon, Mayfield is sponsoring a She Pitches, She Wins. Okay, Mayfield is one of the most prestigious VC firms. This is the Silicon Valley. They have 18 entries, 18 entries. I mean, really, that should have 800 entries, not 18. So there are opportunities available, and I think we need to make sure at this point that we create that infrastructure for people to take advantage of those opportunities. So opportunities are there, is that middle gap that is missing from my perspective, but would be curious.
And one thing is, having seen a lot of the field, I'm sometimes less optimistic. I think you can have these opportunities, you can have them at the highest level. But what holds back, at least say, if I think rural India women, is just very basic things, right? It will be not a lot of electricity, not a lot of access to things. So I think the fear is you end up creating quite a lot of inequality in that there are these sort of back-end, training LLM kind of jobs, the ones that can be really broken up, the kinds that Lisa and Suhani looked at, that those go maybe a lot also to women who work from home. But when it comes to who's writing those patents and who's doing the top end, that's still a very small market. And as long as you're looking at, say in India, looking at the IITs, or you're looking at these engineering colleges, and they're largely male-dominated, increasingly so very often, it's not clear to me that this is going to be democratized just by pushing out these single schemes. It's very much about how are we actually changing where that human capital is taking place. And getting into these colleges is hard. You need to pay tuition to get into it. Parents don't want to pay tuition for girls as much as they want to pay for boys. So in the end, I think the constraints that women face often don't change just because a new technology has emerged or we offer those opportunities. As long as we're not seeing equalized access to human capital in many levels, which we aren't, and if the returns become larger, I think, thinking about people like Claudia's work, if we think that a lot of these are kind of equivalent of greedy jobs, at the high end, there's very high returns to it. I'm not so sure that just pushing it out there is going to help women. I think in the end, a lot of the biases we have to address are the same, irrespective of the technology. And technology is not going to change those biases.
Okay, well, a lot of great learnings. Thanks, everybody here.
And so what would you say to, you've done a ton of work, so we'd love to have your thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a mixed bag. And I think similar to what you all have actually said, there seem to be some headway in terms of some strategies. Maybe it's equalizing the cost, that's what's really needed. But then to ultimately acquire and find the woman who is left out and she's not applying even, there is an additional cost component. And then how do you then reduce that? Then you have to put in, so that's where I think the cross-sector collaboration actually is really useful, because maybe civil society can absorb some of that cost. Funders absorb some of that cost. Private sector may not be able to do that. And then that helps enable and create a system where we can then equalize the cost of hiring the women ultimately for the private sector company, who then can take on those women. And then hopefully if productivity's differences are there for certain types of jobs at least, maybe there's even more of a business case for pushing companies to hire more women for certain roles. So I do see that this is an opportunity for cross-sector collaboration, a time where we can bring in civil society funders, startups to fill in the gaps. But thank you all for your time and all of your really keen insights on this topic.
Next, we have Pooja Goyal, CEO of Udayti Foundation, who will walk us through how her team is helping accelerate women's workforce participation, specifically in Uttar Pradesh in India, and how that ties into India's dream of becoming a $1 trillion economy that Kirtika also touched upon in the panel discussion we just heard. So welcome, Pooja.
What an incredible morning and an incredible discussion on AI. I wanted to add just to that. There's so many things I wanted, going through my head. But one of the challenges is that women are not using AI as much. To your point, Kirtika, and because people who use AI better are the ones who are going to go up the value chain, and women are not, and we need to do more work around it. But thank you, Suhani, Hoover Institution, Maina Mahila, for really bringing us all together. It's just been incredible. It seems like our tribe kind of just making it happen. My name is Pooja Goyal. I'm the CEO of the Udayti Foundation. We are driving a lot of systems change work in India, working with governments and with private sector to really increase India's female labor force participation rate. I have been in the private sector for almost 28 years. I had been in the private sector either as a startup founder or with large corporates. In fact, I used to work in the Bay Area with Adobe for many years before moving back to India. So it's absolutely amazing to be here and talk a little bit about our work at Udayti. And if any of this resonates, I would love to, or triggers any questions, thoughts, would love to catch up. I'm going to speak about this female labor force participation rate as an economic imperative for India. There is just India is in a very uniquely positive position. As India talks about creating new jobs, getting to this $30 trillion economy, one big advantage we have is the demographic dividend, the large demographic dividend that we have. And if you just peel the onion, what you realize is that a large part of that demographic dividend that we talk about is actually gender dividend. It is, it's the 196 million employable women that are currently out of the workforce in India. And, so the good news has been that the female labor force participation rate in India has been going up. From 27%, it was almost at 25, 27% for many years, and then in 2023, it went up to 37%, and then last year to 41.3%. But if you peel the onion a little bit, what you realize is that all of that increase has been, the right side graph, all of that increase has been in rural and self-employment. If you look at women in the formal workforce, that number has pretty much stayed stagnant, and it's come down. So when you're talking about new jobs, good jobs, AI jobs, urban areas are going to be our engines of growth, and women are not participating there, and the numbers are going down. So that's a really big problem. And when you compare India to other countries, what you see is, again, the percentage of women in the workforce is still extremely low, and we need to go a long way. The clock is ticking. There are two big opportunities that we need to work on. As I said, the gender dividend, it's a shrinking window. So this dividend is not going to last forever. We have 2 decades to make it work. In many states in India already, the replacement fertility rate is below 2.1 already. So that means that the population is starting to get stagnant or go down, as we've seen in other countries like South Korea, Japan, etc., right? So it's a shrinking window. There is a sense of urgency. And second, someone pointed, yes, Kirtiga talked about it, right? That we actually have one of the largest gender budgets in the world today. Last year, the union budget, 6.8% of the union budget was allocated for gender. And this year, it is 8.9%. So there are large allocations that have been made for worker women's housing, about 5,000 crores, for childcare centers, about 2,000 crores. So it's extremely important that we engage as private sector, civil society organizations, as this is going to be used. And I'll just give you an example. We are working with Uttar Pradesh, and I'll talk to you about it later. You know, on paper, you see some working women's hostel. Our team went out to see, okay, what are these working women's hostels? How are they being used? There was one in the middle of nowhere. And of course, there is no woman using that working women's hostel. In a state of 250 million people, there is just one working women's hostel in the middle of nowhere, not where there are jobs, right? So it's very easy to say, okay, patriarchal norms, and Uttar Pradesh is one of the states with a lot of patriarchy. But fathers are ready to send their daughters, but where will they live? So from India perspective, well, we did a good job at early childhood, the Beti Pachao. Then the adolescence, the Beti Padhao. Our gross enrollment ratios for women is one of the highest in the world now. If you look at gross enrollment ratios for sciences in undergrad, 51% are women. So women are studying, are graduating at record numbers, largest in some of the world. But when it comes to the drop-off happens when you enter the workforce. And you can look at it as the supply side or the demand side. Udaiti's work is focused largely on demand side barriers, and we heard a lot of it this morning. One is design of workplaces, design of our urban infrastructure. It has been designed for men, by men. It's not as if somebody is sitting there discriminating, but it has to be designed right. Infrastructure. We just do not have safe accommodation for women, safe mobility, childcare centers, overall security, and policy. Today, if you want to hire women at whatever levels, it is harder to hire women. That's why we have to pay double to the recruit. At whatever level, if you want to hire a woman on the shop floor in a flexi staffing job at 15,000 rupees per month, or an investment associate in a venture capital firm, it's just harder to hire women. It's more expensive to hire women, and it is riskier to hire women. There are 54 laws in our country, in India, which actually prevent women from being in the workforce. And they are being systematically now removed. One of them is the night shift policy. So, women can't work in manufacturing facilities after 7 o'clock. And now, state by state, this policy is being dismantled. But what's happening is that when that happens, the Department of Labor says, look, you have to register with us, get a permission, and then you are responsible to ensure that the woman reaches home safely. So there is no reason for a private sector company, which has already so many things on their head, to take one more additional risk there, right? So there are multiple policy-led interventions that we are working on. very quickly, these are the three broad pillars that we are working on: shaping demand for quality jobs, accelerating the V infrastructure enablers, which are safe accommodation, safe mobility, childcare centers, overall security, and increasing and scaling women enterprises. Again, from the perspective that if it's a woman-founded company, gender parity takes care of itself. You will employ more women. The big challenge right now is that we have a lot of women entrepreneurs, but they have not reached a scale where they are even employing another person. So there are from the survey, PLFS survey, which the government does, there are 49 million women entrepreneurs. But in urban areas, only 600,000 employ one more person besides themselves. So in order to be able to take advantage of this multiplier effect of women-owned, we need to help scale them, through access to skills, markets, and capital. And we sit in the middle of think tanks, research institutions like Hoover, Yale, policy think tanks, and NGOs who are doing great work on the ground. We are kind of sitting in the middle, working with decision makers, influencers, working with the government to essentially provide data-backed evidence, whether it data and insights, proof of concepts, what works, what doesn't work, do some pilots, do some case studies, and then something that can scale, take it back and see how that can scale and institutionalize that change, whether it is with the private sector or with the government. So one of the data-backed evidence is kind of at the foundation of all of the work we do. There is a data hub called Close the Gender Gap Data Hub, which we launched about a year and a half ago. That's available to everyone. What we are trying to do is really make information and data about women's economic participation in India very digestible and available at very regular frequency. So just an example is in the private sector, the challenges baseline, what does the number look like in different sectors and so on. So what we did was we looked at 2,100 NSC listed companies who by law are supposed to provide information on women's workforce participation in their annual reports and BRSR reports. And we made it into dashboards. So now, across 23 sectors, you know what is the percentage of women in every sector at different levels, at key management positions, women on boards. And by sector, you can say, okay, health, 41% women's workforce participation. The challenges there might be different. In pharma, it is 11%. And in power and construction, it is 2%. So what now we can begin to do is systematically set targets and work with the sectors to dismantle barriers which are very sector specific. So we are working, so Mahindra & Mahindra, we've actually worked in Mohali in one of the Swaraj engine factories where they were actually trying to get to over 50% women on the shop floor. That's proved hard over the last year and a half, but they've been able to increase the numbers significantly of women on the shop floor, and we've captured that as a case study. But in these sectors, we are working with many leaders, Mahindra in flexi staffing with Quest Corp, Team Lee's, Adecco in pharma with Dr. Reddy's, Biocon Biologics, BFSI with Axis Bank, Niva Bupa, and then with industry bodies, because they play a crucial role in helping institutionalize it. Once you've kind of said, okay, this works or this doesn't work, then you work with the institutional body to institutionalize it. We're working with 3 state governments, Uttar Pradesh, Odisha, and we'll start work with Maharashtra now. And then with some of the media and coalition partners like CNBC, CII, LinkedIn, Good Business Lab, Ladies Who Lead, to ensure that all of this evidence that we are producing, we are actually able to get it in the hands of the decision makers who can really move the needle on the ground. I don't know how much time do I have. So this is private sector. This is, I'm happy to talk about it, but essentially sector by sector, what we've done is set some targets to say, can we actually increase pharma from 11% to 25% by 2030, and are working with the sector. Yeah. In government, in UP, okay, give me 2 minutes. I'll just share the Women's Economic Empowerment Index. So what we were able to do there is collect all the data district by district, got 54 indicators, and across 75 districts now, you can really track which district is doing well on the V front. And then have different kinds of interventions for different zones of districts. And this is available to everyone. So to give an example, Gautam Budh Nagar is 6 on 75, and across these 5 pillars then, you can actually see where the interventions are needed. Yeah, so I think I've run out of time, but it's a very exciting time in India. It was great to see so much good work happening, and I'm taking back a lot of evidence with me to essentially make the case for some of these changes on the ground. The tailwinds are with us as far as government is concerned, private sector is concerned. We just have to go and do it in the next decade. Thank you.